Luciano's head dropped forward again, and the iron collar snapped him back so sharply he gasped. His knees scraped the ground as he tried to steady himself, but his arms were pulled upward by the chains, forcing him to kneel upright no matter how his body begged to collapse. "Lift your head," Mistress Valeria ordered. Her voice came without warning. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her tone. She spoke as if she were irritated by nothing more than a crooked picture frame. Luciano forced his eyes open. They burned as if someone were dragging sand beneath the eyelids. His lashes quivered like they were crying, though no tears were left in him. "Scrub?" she said. He reached for the stiff brush in front of him. His fingers shook too violently to grip it. It slipped. A guard immediately kicked it back at him, hard enough to jab into his ribs. "Don't drop tools," the guard muttered. Luciano's voice barely existed. After 2 nights awake, sound itself cost energy. He picked up the brush slowly, dragging it across the floor. His arm jerked uncontrollably as if another person were pulling it away. The strokes came crooked, uneven, uncontrolled. Valeria stepped closer, heels tapping against the ground with slow disapproval. "That is not clean," she said. Luciano tried to focus his eyes, but they drifted in different directions. His head wobbled. He inhaled, then forgot to exhale. His brain had to remind his lungs to breathe. "Do you see what I see?" she asked. He answered, though the words broke in his throat. "Yes." "Madame, you're unsure," she replied. Her tone held no anger. Emotionless cruelty was worse than rage. There was nothing to fight against, nothing to argue with. She simply expected perfection from a man who could barely remain conscious. She crouched next to him, speaking near his ear. "Work first. Rest happens only when you've earned it." Luciano swallowed. His tongue felt like dried cloth. "I am trying." "No," she said softly, as if explaining something obvious. "Trying is not working. Work does not require sleep." A guard chuckled behind him. Luciano dragged the brush again, but the floor swerved in his vision, as though it were bending, melting. His arm slowed. His head drifted downward. The collar yanked him upright before he reached the ground. Valeria raised an eyebrow. "Do you think exhaustion excuses you?" Luciano's lips twitched. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to say that bodies are made to sleep, that rest isn't earned like wages. But speech required thought, and thought required clarity, and he had none left. Valeria stood. "If your hands shake, train them not to." Luciano forced his muscles to obey. The brush moved again. "Better," she muttered. "Do not fail again." His body trembled so violently the floor became blurred. His jaw locked as he clenched it to stay awake. His heart pounded raggedly, too fast, like it wanted to escape his chest. The guard splashed a bucket of cold water across him without warning. The shock stabbed his nerves. His breathing sped up, then slowed painfully. The water dripped from his hair, but instead of cooling him, it made his skin feel heavy and numb. Valeria turned away. "He'll be awake until sunrise," she said. Luciano didn't look at her. His mind fought its own dreams that tried to pull him into darkness, into nothingness. If he surrendered for even 1 second, she would punish him further. His eyes burned as he willed them open. His enemy wasn't Valeria. Not the guards, not the collar. His enemy was sleep itself, and Valeria was determined to make that enemy stronger than him. Luciano's forehead struck the floor again, hard enough that his teeth rattled. He didn't even feel the impact this time. Pain was too distant, too delayed, as if it had to travel a great distance to reach him. Before he could slide into unconsciousness, a hand seized his hair and yanked his head upward. "Wake up," the guard's voice hissed close to his ear. "You're not done." Luciano's eyes opened halfway, but nothing inside them focused. It was like looking at the world through dirty water. The guard let go of his hair only to thrust a bucket against his face. Water splashed over his skin, running down into his shirt. It slid cold down his spine, but instead of clarity, it left him shivering and lightheaded. "Still empty," the guard snorted. Like water poured into a cracked pot. Luciano tried to speak, but only air escaped his throat, dry air, shaking air. The guard stepped away, clearly pleased that Luciano couldn't even protest. Valeria re-entered the hall, though Luciano didn't hear her footsteps. He only knew she was there when he sensed stillness, her kind of stillness, sharp and calculating like a blade set quietly on a table. She inspected the floor. He had scrubbed the same section for hours, yet his hands were too unsteady to make it perfect. She did not consider fatigue. She did not acknowledge the trembling. She only looked for results. "It's still dirty," she concluded, though the wood gleamed from repeated cleaning. Luciano managed a whisper. "It's clean." "It is clean when I say it is clean," she replied. There was no anger, no debate, just a rule carved into her tone. His opinion was never part of the equation. Luciano dipped the brush into water that now felt like ice. His wrist shook so severely that drops splattered over his face and shirt. His breathing came in frantic bursts, then suddenly slowed, heavy and dragging. His body couldn't decide whether to panic or shut down. His vision blurred, then sharpened, then splintered into fragments. Luciano blinked, but the world didn't blink back into clarity. Instead, he saw two Valerias, one turning her head, the other half a second behind. Then only one remained. His thoughts scattered and reformed without order. Valeria leaned down, narrowing her eyes. "Are you listening?" He nodded slowly, too slowly. "You will not rest," she whispered. "Not until I see perfection." Her words dragged through his brain like chains. He tried to stand, but his legs refused to obey. They weren't numb, they simply belonged to someone else. The collar pulled him back into place, keeping him upright, forcing posture on a body that had forgotten how to hold itself. Luciano's mind fought to grasp a single thought, a reason, a focus. Something to keep him awake. Something to keep him alive. Work first, rest later. He repeated it like a chant. Not because he believed it, because his consciousness needed something to cling to. Valeria's voice softened unexpectedly. "You are capable. I am giving you the chance to prove it." Chance? He fought the urge to laugh, not from humor, but delirium. His muscles twitched without permission. His fingers curled into claws around the brush. His heart thumped so slowly that each beat surprised him. He scrubbed it anyway, not for her approval, not for freedom. Not because she commanded, but because if he stopped, if he refused, he would collapse, and collapsing meant surrendering to sleep. And sleep would destroy him more than she could. For the first time he understood the real fight. Not against Valeria. Not against the chains, against the weight behind his eyelids. And the longer Luciano kept them open, the more dangerous his silence became. Valeria did not leave Luciano alone. She stood nearby, not watching the floor, watching him. Her gaze followed the movement of his arms, the tremor in his fingers, the hitch in his breathing. She examined him the way a jeweler inspects a flawed stone, not with sympathy but with cold appraisal. "Your posture is collapsing," she said. Luciano forced his back straight. The pain in his spine shot upward like lightning, but he obeyed. Not because he wanted to, his body simply reacted before his mind could. The collar around his neck pulled at him as if it had become part of his muscles, teaching him what proper meant through discomfort. Valeria paced slowly. Two guards trailed behind her like shadows, silent, faceless, inconsequential. She didn't need them to look powerful. Power clung to her naturally. "Slaves reflect their masters," she said, loud enough for the guards to hear. "If he is sloppy, it means I tolerate sloppiness. I don't." Her heel clicked against the polished tile. Even her footsteps sounded proud. Luciano's hand slipped for a moment, causing the brush to squeak against the wood instead of gliding. The small sound drew her attention instantly. She turned, almost offended that the floor dared complain under his grip. "Do you hear how the bristles scream?" she asked. Luciano swallowed. His throat was sand. "They scream because you don't respect the work." Her words echoed in the hall as though the building itself agreed. Luciano didn't understand her logic. How could brushes scream, floors complain? Yet, in his exhausted mind, everything felt alive and judging him. Every mistake felt amplified, every movement magnified. Respect the work. The phrase lodged itself in his head, unwanted. Valeria continued walking, speaking mostly to herself now, as if lecturing an invisible audience. Perhaps she believed she always had one. My father built this house on discipline. My mother maintained it through refinement. Imperfection is decay. Decay is death. She stopped in the middle of the hall and turned again. Her hands rested behind her back, elegantly folded, every finger poised as if knowing their exact purpose. Even slaves should strive for dignity. Luciano wasn't sure whether she meant it as a threat or an aspiration. Dignity, he almost forgot what that felt like. His shaking hands, his empty stomach, his swollen eyelids, none of them felt dignified. He dipped the brush again. Water splashed over his knuckles. They were cracked and reddened, but he no longer felt pain clearly. Sensations were fading into distant signals. His fingers moved, not with skill, but repetition like muscle memory carved through punishment. Valeria approached, bending slightly to examine a small section of wood. The strands of her auburn hair fell over her face, shining under the light. She brushed them aside with precise grace, then extended one gloved finger to touch the floor. A single speck of dust clung to her glove, her eyelids lowered. She didn't rage, she didn't scream. Her voice came quiet, more chilling than anger could ever be. "Do you wish to embarrass me, Luciano?" Hearing his name pierced through his haze, it was the first time she had spoken it. A jolt of awareness cut through his exhaustion. His mind snapped back for a moment. "No, Mistress," she smiled, not kindly, not warmly. She smiled the way one does when a tool finally responds correctly. "Then don't." She stood, and her voice regained its public tone. Perfection is respect. Mediocrity is betrayal. Luciano forced himself to scrub faster, sharper, almost frantically. Not because he believed her words, he barely understood them anymore, but her smile lingered in his mind, not as a reward, but as a warning. The floor beneath him gleamed with a sheen that might have been polish or the reflection of a man slowly breaking into obedience, and Valeria knew it. She took pride not in clean floors, but in the slow, exquisite shaping of a soul. Luciano's arm shook so violently that the brush nearly slipped from his fingers. He did not stop. He couldn't. His breath came short and uneven, as if he were drowning above air. His head felt too heavy for his neck to hold. Hours had blurred without meaning, without count, without mercy. A whisper slid from his throat, barely shaped into sound. "I just need a moment." His knees buckled. Not out of rebellion, just human limits surrendering. His body sagged toward the polished floor, seeking only brief relief, not defiance. His eyelids drifted downward like weights on strings cut loose. One breath, 1 second. One blink. That was all he wanted, nothing more. Before his skin touched the wood, a guard slammed the metal chain connected to his collar upward, jerking his neck back. Luciano choked on his own gasp. "You stand?" the guard said. The voice held no hate, no passion, just procedure, a rule being recited. Luciano clawed at the floor, trying to push himself upright, but his wrists gave out. His bones trembled under their own weight. The guard pulled again, harder this time, dragging him upright by the collar. Luciano coughed violently, his vision splitting into pale streaks of light. He leaned forward to brace himself with his palms, panting, dizzy, nauseous. His body screamed louder than any voice could. "I wasn't sleeping," he managed. "You were falling," the guard replied. Falling means resting. Luciano didn't understand how logic could be so cruel. Falling wasn't resting. Falling was collapsing. Falling was the opposite of control. But here, even surrender was forbidden. Even weakness was a punishable act. The guard tightened the collar strap. Luciano's breath thinned. "You do not close your eyes on duty," the guard continued. "Those are the rules?" Rules? The word echoed, hollow and cold. Rules had become laws of physics here. They didn't need to make sense. They simply existed, carved into routine by repetition and consequence. Luciano stood, swaying, his legs twitching involuntarily. He couldn't feel his knees. His ankles tingled with numb fire, and each heartbeat vibrated through his skull like heavy iron slamming against metal. His mind drifted, despite him. Memories rose like fogged fragments, a small room, a quiet bed. His mother's voice urging him to rest, even on good days. "You grow when you sleep, my son." Sleep had been care, protection, growth, the warmest human need. Now it felt like a crime. His chin lowered again. His body begged for surrender. The floor he had polished so perfectly now called to him like a cradle. A single moment of unconscious relief felt more precious than food or freedom. He reached for balance, but his eyelids drooped once more. Without warning, a sharp sting slapped across his face. Not violent, just enough to burn his awareness back into place. Valeria stood in front of him. She must have returned silently. "Look at me," she commanded. Luciano forced his head up. He met her eyes through a haze of pain. She studied him as though he were an animal struggling to learn its trick. "You think exhaustion gives you permission to fail?" she asked. "No, mistress," he whispered, barely audible. She leaned closer, her voice soft but edged like glass. "Exhaustion is proof that you are being shaped. Weakness is the material. Will is the sculpture. I am carving you, Luciano." "Carving," she said it like art, not cruelty. He stared at her, heart thudding in slow, hollow beats. "What am I being carved into?" Valeria smiled, almost gently. "Someone who never rests until he deserves it." Luciano's body shook not from cold, but from the realization that she believed her words. She truly thought she was giving him purpose through suffering. She thought she was teaching him endurance by breaking him. And with every second he remained awake, Luciano began to wonder if she was right. Servants hurried past Luciano, whispering orders and clearing the hall. His work had suddenly been halted, not finished, interrupted, a rare occurrence. He waited for punishment, for explanation, for another command telling him not to breathe without permission. None came. Instead, the collar chain was unhooked from its post. Not removed, never removed, but loosened, dangling like a leash waiting for someone to reclaim it. The guard spoke without meeting his eyes. "Stay here. Do not move. Do not sit. Do not close your eyes." Then he left with the others, all of them. Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Luciano stood alone. Silence crept in where voices should have been, where cruel reminders usually repeated themselves like prayers. He did not understand. They weren't finished with him. They weren't done telling him how to stand, how to exist, how to suffer correctly. Something was wrong. His exhaustion fogged his thinking, but a strange intuition cut through it. The manor was never quiet at this hour. Night duties were strict servants, polished silver, monitored lamps, cleaned until the day returned. But now, swift instructions had pulled them away, leaving the house to breathe slow and uneasy. Luciano swallowed, dry and painful. What if this was a test? A new rule to fail? A trap to catch him resting? His legs trembled more violently. His body begged, threatened, pleaded to collapse. He stared at the floor. If he leaned forward just a little, gravity could do the rest. He wouldn't be responsible. His body would simply fall. No, he told himself, stay alive. Stay awake to stay alive? His vision doubled. 2 floors beneath him, 2 hallways in front of him, shadows splitting into mirror copies. His heart pulsed too loudly to hear his own thoughts. His body swayed, fighting a war with invisibly weighted air. Then something unusual. A muffled sound echoed from deeper inside the manor. Not from Valeria's chambers, lower, beneath, as though a door had closed somewhere it shouldn't be open. Luciano tensed, his senses sharpening despite fatigue. That sound wasn't common. It wasn't part of the house's rhythm. Another noise followed, not footsteps, not movement, breathing, heavy, uneven, struggling breathing. Someone was panting, trying not to be heard. Luciano turned his head slowly, painfully toward the corridor where the sound came from. He shouldn't. Curiosity wasn't allowed. Observation wasn't permitted. But exhaustion stripped away fear. He didn't care about rules for one fragile moment. A shadow flickered at the far end of the hall, too fast to identify. Too real to imagine. Luciano's eyes widened. He whispered without understanding why. "Who is there?" Silence answered him. Or maybe nothing answered because the presence had gone quiet? Or maybe the silence itself was a warning. He wasn't sure any more which instincts belonged to him and which were created by deprivation. The shadow didn't return, but the breathing had not gone entirely. It softened, almost masked, as though someone waited for movement before daring to make a sound again. Luciano's exhaustion twisted into dread. He wasn't alone, but not the way he was used to. Not in the presence of orders, whips of command, or guards repeating rules. This was different, unplanned, uncontrolled, unexpected. He stood frozen, held up only by fear. And yet, something inside him, something small, buried under fatigue, felt awake for the first time in days. Whatever was hiding in the manor was not supposed to be there. Luciano realized that tonight, unlike every other night, the house was not watching him, it was watching itself. And something inside it did not want to be seen. For the first time, Luciano sensed danger that did not come from his captors. Luciano did not choose to move. His body simply reacted, instinct guiding what exhaustion could no longer control. His feet dragged toward the corridor, but not in disobedience. In caution, in fear. The unknown sound felt more urgent than any rule he'd ever been threatened with. He stopped where the corridor narrowed, his chain scraped faintly against the floor. The sound echoed, too loud in the quiet. He paused, forcing even his breathing to slow. The breathing he had heard earlier responded, quickened, then muffled. Someone tried to silence themselves. Luciano whispered again, soft, almost apologetic, as if the manner itself could punish him for speaking. "Who is there?" A long pause. Then a voice, not loud, not confident, trembling, older. "Don't speak," it rasped. "They will hear." Luciano's pulse surged. Not the guards, not Valeria. Who else could they mean? Before he could ask, the voice continued, urgent and broken. "You're not allowed to sleep. Because your silence is useful, your exhaustion makes you blind." Luciano stiffened. His mind tried to understand, but exhaustion clouded the meaning like smoke choking a fire. "What does that mean?" He forced out, barely forming the words. "You don't see things when they happen," the voice said. "You can't question what you don't witness clearly. They keep you awake so your mind cannot remember what it should." Luciano shook his head slowly, confused. His thoughts drifted like a candle losing flame. The voice stepped closer, but still hidden behind the corner. "Look around you," it whispered. "The manor is never quiet on purpose. When it is, something is being hidden, something shameful." Luciano swallowed, fighting dizziness. "Who are you?" Silence. Then, after a strained moment, someone who stayed awake too long. "Before you." Luciano's breath caught. His chain suddenly felt colder. He imagined another body, another pair of eyes forced open every night, forbidden to rest, until thought itself became a prisoner. "Why are you here?" Luciano asked, though part of him feared the answer. "To warn you," the unseen figure replied. "Before exhaustion becomes a cage you will never escape from." Luciano leaned against the wall without meaning to. His knees shook, his head heavy. "What is happening tonight?" The voice hesitated, then, "The lady of this house is not the one you saved, not anymore. Something else walks in her footsteps." Luciano's fogged mind tried forming sense out of shadows. Valeria, who he had saved from collapse, from choking on her own breath. Valeria, who now deprived him of rest. Valeria, who never once looked him in the eyes. Was she truly changed? Or had she always been this way? The voice trembled more with each word. "You must endure. Do not collapse. If you sleep now, you will wake with no memory of what is being hidden." Luciano felt a sinking dread. A memory formed, brief, blurred of nights before being forbidden sleep. A door's creak, a whisper of arguments. A name he couldn't remember. A shadow not belonging to any servant. "What are they hiding?" he whispered. No reply this time. Only a slow retreat. Footsteps fading deeper into the corridor, swallowed by silence. Luciano forced his tired eyes open wider, afraid of what closing them might erase. He stood there, shaking, ears straining for the voice to return, but whatever had spoken either fled or vanished. The matter remained still, too still. Luciano now feared not the cruelty he could see, but the secrets meant to vanish with his sleep. Valeria swept into the corridor with sudden force, her silk dress brushing past the stone floor. Luciano straightened immediately, his chain clinking in panic. His knees nearly buckled, but he forced himself upright, trembling harder than ever. She had arrived without warning, an impossible thing to predict, even fully awake. "Why are you standing here?" she asked sharply. No greeting, no explanation. No trace of the trembling voice that had warned him just moments ago. Luciano opened his mouth, but fear tangled his words. Should he speak of what he heard? Should he admit curiosity? Should he pretend nothing happened? Valeria's eyes narrowed. "If you cannot answer, you should at least bow your head." Her voice was smooth, polished, yet more distant than usual. Luciano lowered his gaze instantly, though his vision wavered violently. She walked slowly around him, evaluating him as if he were an object needing repair. "You look worse than yesterday," she observed. "I suppose exhaustion is teaching you discipline?" His breath hitched, his body swayed. She thought fatigue was a lesson. She believed the collapse of his strength meant obedience. She didn't want him rested. She wanted him helpless. Valeria stepped closer, too close. Her perfume clung to the air around him, faint, but more bitter than sweet. "Your purpose in this matter," she continued, "depends on how long you can stand without falling." Luciano whispered, nearly breaking, "Mistress, why didn't I sleep?" Her expression barely reacted, though something cold flickered behind her eyes. "Because you were spared once," she said softly. "You should never forget the cost of survival." His mind stumbled over the words. Spared once? The cost? Was she referring to the day he saved her, or something else hidden beneath that memory? He dared to lift his eyes just enough to see her face. There was no gratitude for the past, no acknowledgement of his sacrifice. Only calculation, as if she were maintaining something important rather than punishing him personally. Valeria leaned closer. "You will not sleep until I am certain you remember your place." "Others before you forgot." Luciano's heart froze. Others before him? The warning voice had said the same? Another captive? Someone who stayed awake too long? Someone who saw something they shouldn't have seen, something the house wanted erased. He forced himself to speak through trembling lips. "What happened to them?" Valeria tilted her head slightly, almost curious at his question. "They rested," she replied, "when they were not meant to, and rest took them apart." Luciano's body felt colder. Was that a threat? An explanation? A lie? Or the truth twisted into something worse? She stepped behind him, and he could no longer see her. Her voice drifted near his ear like a whisper of warning or control. "If you see things, forget them. If you hear things, silence them. And if you ever dream, keep it to yourself." Luciano closed his eyes for a moment, only a moment. He didn't dare do more. But in that instant, her words burned into him like a brand. He understood something she didn't mean to reveal. She wasn't afraid of captives rebelling. She was afraid of captives remembering. When he opened his eyes again, she was walking away, her steps measured, too practiced. As she disappeared around the corner, Luciano remained standing, body shaking not from exhaustion, but from realization. Sleep wasn't forbidden as punishment. It was forbidden because sleep could reveal truth. Luciano no longer fought to stay awake out of obedience, but out of fear of what sleep might uncover. Luciano moved quietly through the hall, chains rattling faintly with each step. He didn't dare slow, didn't dare pause. Something in the manor had shifted. The oppressive hush of the night pressed against him like a living thing. Normally, the house thrived in silence, every creak, every breath, every shuffle of a servant measured and controlled. Tonight, however, the quiet felt wrong, threatening, alive. He stopped near the main corridor and glanced toward the servants' quarters. Lights flickered dimly and shadows leapt across walls like restless spirits. Matteo and Sofia, two fellow captives, were nowhere in sight. Usually, someone patrolled nearby, reminding him that he wasn't alone, that obedience was never optional. Tonight, he was alone in this strange stillness, but he wasn't safe. Something watched. Something waited. A whisper of sound reached him, soft, deliberate, almost a mocking echo of his own breathing. He froze, chains jangling softly. The noise wasn't human, or at least not entirely. He tilted his head, straining to detect any pattern. Then came another noise, softer this time, like footsteps across polished stone, but without the distinct rhythm of a person walking. It was hesitant, calculated, waiting to see if he would falter. Luciano's pulse thudded painfully in his chest. Fatigue weighed him down, but the fear, the unfamiliar uncertainty, sharpened his senses. His hands gripped the chains as if holding on to his own existence. Keep moving, keep awake. Don't let it see weakness. The corridor seemed to narrow with each step. The shadows twisted, almost crawling along the walls, morphing into shapes that his mind tried and failed to name. Was it the exhaustion creating illusions? Or was the house truly awake tonight, alive in ways he had never imagined? He heard it again, a whisper from deeper in the manor, low and trembling. Not Valeria, not the guards. Something older, something patient, something that existed beneath the rules and the chains. He hesitated. Should he follow? Should he hide? His instincts shouted conflicting answers, but the chains forced him forward, dragging him like a reluctant sentinel. "Who's there?" Luciano whispered, voice raw from days of silence. His words barely carried in the vast emptiness. No immediate reply, only a pause. Then a faint voice, almost like a memory, spoke. "You're awake, and they cannot bear it." Luciano froze. They cannot bear it. What did it mean? The house, Valeria? The guards? Or something else entirely, something the manor itself hid? A soft shuffle of feet echoed from the far end of the corridor. He turned his head slightly, squinting into the darkness. Nothing. Only the faint glow of lanterns swaying with the movement of air, casting long, distorted shadows. His mind tried to rationalize what he saw. He wanted to tell himself it was exhaustion, hallucinations, the creeping effects of sleepless nights. But even in the haze of fatigue, something in him knew better. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "They are restless. You have made them restless. They feel what you feel." Luciano's heart pounded. His endurance, his suffering, was no longer his alone. It had spread? The guards who once barked commands, the servants who hurried past in fear, even Valeria herself. They were all affected. He realized with a sudden clarity that the entire manor now mirrored his wakefulness. The exhaustion he had borne silently had infected them. He clenched his fists, chains rattling with quiet determination. He didn't feel pride or victory or relief, only awareness. His presence had altered the rules of the house, shifted the balance of power in a way no words could capture. Sleep had been forbidden to break him, but in remaining awake, he had become more than a captive. From somewhere behind the walls, a low sigh echoed. Not a human sigh, not entirely, but the sound of a house breathing in tandem with its prisoners. The realization struck him cold. Tonight, the house itself would not sleep. Luciano's body trembled, not from fatigue but from understanding. His silence, his endurance, his refusal to collapse, had awakened the manor. For the first time, Luciano knew the night belonged to him, and the house had no choice but to stay awake with him. Luciano froze at the top of the narrow staircase. Every creak beneath his chains seemed to announce him, though no one appeared. His head spun from exhaustion, every thought thick and sluggish, yet a sharp awareness had taken root. Something hidden was moving, something that the day's routine had always kept locked away. He climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, each chain link dragging behind him like a reminder of captivity. The manor seemed to hold its breath with him. There were no whispers, no distant footsteps, only the soft sound of air shifting in spaces usually ignored. And yet the presence he felt was palpable, like shadows leaning in to observe. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly ajar. He could see the faint flicker of candlelight spilling from the crack, a glow that didn't match the usual lamps of the hall. His pulse quickened. Normally, doors remained closed, locked, controlled, but this one, it was inviting him, or perhaps daring him. Luciano's chain scraped across the wooden floor, a protest of metal against stone, yet he pressed forward. One hand reached for the doorframe, his knuckles were raw. His breath caught in his throat. He did not know what he would find, but some instinct told him it would answer questions the sleepless nights had only begun to ask. Through the crack, he glimpsed her Valeria. She wasn't standing in her usual commanding pose. Instead, she was crouched, almost hidden, moving carefully over a small desk cluttered with papers and objects he had never noticed before. Her hands shook slightly as she rearranged them. Luciano's mind registered surprise. Was this the same woman who denied him rest, who watched him like a sculptor shaping stone? Now she seemed fragile, hesitant, human. He leaned closer, trying to see without being seen. That was when he noticed the object she held, a folded letter, sealed with wax and bearing an unfamiliar crest. Her eyes darted toward the shadows, toward the hall. She whispered low, as if talking to someone who could not hear her. They cannot know, not yet. If they do, everything fails. Luciano's stomach turned. Everything fails? Who were the they? And what had she been hiding all along? The sleepless nights, the chains, the relentless demands, it had never been just about obedience. It had been about control, surveillance, secrets buried so deep that even a captive's exhaustion could not unearth them. Until now. He shifted slightly. A floorboard groaned. Valeria froze. Her hand trembled, the wax seal cracking slightly. For a moment she was not the all-powerful mistress. She was vulnerable, human, afraid of being discovered. Luciano's mind raced, foggy from fatigue but sharp with clarity. Everything she had done, every command, every denial of rest, every silent observation was designed to keep him from noticing. The secrecy wasn't only hers. It was the houses, the chains, the forced labor, the sleepless nights. They were barriers to seeing. He realized for the first time that his suffering had been manipulated, not merely punishment, but camouflage. And he had unknowingly followed the rules perfectly, eyes open, hands moving, mind exhausted, yet he had finally arrived at the truth hidden behind closed doors. A single thought struck him. If Valeria could fear discovery, if she could tremble, then she was not invincible. And if she was not invincible, then her power over him was not absolute. Luciano's fingers tightened around the chain. He would remain awake. He would watch, he would learn, and he would endure. As Valeria suddenly rose and moved toward the door, Luciano ducked back into the shadows. His breath came in shallow bursts. The candlelight flickered across her face, illuminating the faintest shadow of worry and emotion she never allowed him to see in the daylight. For the first time, Luciano understood the purpose behind his torment, and that understanding ignited a quiet, unyielding strength within him. Luciano's knees trembled as he stood hidden in the corner of the long corridor. The candlelight from the room where Valeria had been flickered, casting shifting shadows across the walls. His body ached from days without rest, from chains that dug into his skin, from muscles screaming for relief. Yet exhaustion had transformed into a kind of awareness. Each moment of sleepless clarity felt sharper, more alive, more purposeful. He had seen her secret. The letter, the trembling hands, the fear behind the calm. Valeria, who denied him rest for what seemed like endless nights, was not merely cruel, she was guarding something too dangerous, too fragile to allow anyone to witness. And he had witnessed it. The house itself seemed to recognize the shift. Shadows stretched unnaturally long, whispering along the walls. Lanterns swayed as if pulled by unseen fingers. The very floors seemed to hum with anticipation. Luciano took a cautious step forward, listening. No guards, no servants. No footfalls other than his own. Tonight, the manor was awake for him, and because of him. He crept toward the room. The door was ajar slightly more than before. Valeria had not locked it. Perhaps she was unaware of the intrusion. Perhaps she believed that exhaustion had broken him enough to prevent curiosity. She had miscalculated. His hands brushed against the frame. Chains rattled softly. The noise seemed impossibly loud in the stillness. Inside, Valeria moved with deliberate care, carefully placing the letter back into the drawer. She muttered under her breath, words too low for him to catch. Yet the urgency in her movements betrayed fear he had never seen in her before. Luciano's heart pounded, but it was a steady rhythm, a drumbeat of resolve. He did not move further. He waited. He had learned the rhythm of the house, the pattern of her steps, the timing of the guards' routines. He had learned endurance, and now he used it not merely to survive, but to act. Valeria straightened and turned toward the doorway. Her gaze swept the hall. She stopped. For a fraction of a second their eyes could have met, but he did not move. He froze like a shadow merged with the wall, holding the control that exhaustion had sharpened into instinct. She sighed, quietly, almost unconsciously. "It is done," she whispered, not to him, not to anyone. The words hung in the air like a secret no one else should hear. Luciano exhaled softly, though barely enough to disturb the silence. He realized then that everything she had tried to suppress, every night of denied rest, every trembling hour of labor, every forced obedience, had been designed to blind him, to keep him from noticing that she herself was bound by rules far older, far heavier than chains or collars. And yet he had endured, he had observed, he had remembered. Sleep-deprived, broken in body, but alert in mind, he held the advantage she did not expect. The realization was intoxicating in its quietness. He didn't move, he didn't speak. He simply watched. Valeria turned away, leaving the room open, the letter still vulnerable, the house's breath shifting with the tension of the unseen. Luciano understood the moment. The night itself had been testing him, pushing him to limits meant to conceal, to control. He had passed. Not with rebellion, not with defiance, not with confrontation, but with patience, awareness, endurance. He stepped back into the shadows, letting chains drag softly across the floor. He didn't rush, he didn't celebrate. He simply held the knowledge, the power in awareness, the quiet justice of understanding before obedience. The mistress of the manor ruled through fear and sleeplessness, but tonight, her captive held a secret she could not control, and for the first time, the balance had shifted.